Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is January 30, 2026.
And if you are feeling a sense of vertigo today, you are not alone. I mean, it really feels like we're standing on the precipice of what historians might one day call the Great Pivot.
It's more than just one crisis.
Oh, absolutely. We aren't just looking at a potential war in the Persian Gulf, though that is. Certainly looming large on every radar screen.
It's front and center.
But at the same time, we're watching the simultaneous reshaping of the Middle East, the freezing of Eastern Europe, and what looks like a fundamental restructuring of the entire global economic order. It's all happening at once.
It really feels that way. The sheer volume of incoming data is frankly overwhelming, and the stakes haven't been this high since. Well, you could argue maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this is spread across 3 different continents.
Right. It's not one single point of failure. It's the whole system flashing red.
We have a lot of data to get through today, and I want to start with the phrase that everyone is whispering in Washington and shouting in Tehran, the game changer.
Yeah.
President Trump has deployed what he calls a massive armada to the Persian Gulf. But this isn't 2019, and it's not even 2024. This feels different.
It is different. For the first time, Iran is signaling a specific finger on the trigger policy that puts every single U.S. base in the region at risk. The old rules of engagement are gone.
The deterrence calculus has completely broken down. And while all eyes are fixated on those aircraft carriers steaming towards the Strait of Hormuz, something equally bizarre and perhaps even more tragic is happening in the freezing cold of Eastern Europe.
You're talking about the truce.
This secret energy truce that seems to have been brokered between Washington and Moscow. And the terrifying part, at least if you're in the administration in Ukraine, is that Kyiv was apparently left completely out in the cold.
Literally and diplomatically. I mean, the symbolism is just brutal.
Yeah. So, our mission for this deep dive is clear. We're going to dissect the hard data behind this military buildup in the Gulf. We're talking specific ships, missile capacities, and the very real math of modern warfare.
Then we need to look at the back channels.
Exactly. We're going to reveal the secret diplomatic back channels running through Turkey right now that, the mainstream press is barely touching.
And finally, we have to look at the end game.
Yes! We're going to analyze the leaked plans for a post-war Gaza that critics are calling a panopticon, and crucially, how those surveillance tactics are bleeding back into domestic issues right here in the U.S.
It is a tangled web, but the connections are there if you look closely. It's all about power, control, and the shifting definition of sovereignty in 2026.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the Persian Gulf. This is the kinetic front. The rhetoric has shifted from what we used to call posturing to something much, much more immediate. We have President Trump, quoted by Reuters, being very specific. He said, quote, "We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships, another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran."
Beautiful is, well, it's an interesting choice of words for a strike source capable of leveling a coastline, to put it mildly.
Right.
But we need to look past the adjectives and get to the ultimatum.
Right.
According to the analysis by Pepe Escobar, who has sources deep inside these diplomatic tracks, Trump isn't just saber-rattling for the cameras. He has issued 3 specific demands to Tehran. And these aren't suggestions. They are absolute red lines.
Let's list them out because the specificity here really, really matters.
Okay, demand 1, no nuclear enrichment. That means civilian or military, 0. Not low grade, not for medical purposes, none. It's a full stop.
And the second?
Demand 2, a substantial reduction of offensive weaponry, and they're specifically targeting their ballistic missile program.
The core of their deterrent.
The absolute core.
Yeah.
And demand 3 is a total stop to support for regional proxies. That means Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, all of it.
Those aren't negotiation starting points.
Not at all.
Those are terms of surrender. That is asking a sovereign nation to dismantle its entire national defense strategy and its foreign policy architecture in, what, a single afternoon?
Precisely. And that is exactly why the Iranian response has shifted so dramatically. You cannot negotiate your own existence. It's just not on the table.
So let's look at the hardware first, because Armada implies a lot of firepower, and I want you, the listener, to understand exactly what is parking itself off the Iranian coast right now.
Okay.
We are tracking carrier strike groups moving into positions, specifically the USS Abraham Lincoln, but of course it's not alone.
Never is.
We have the USS Spruance, the USS Frankie Peterson Jr., the USS Michael Murphy. These are the heavy hitters.
And those are all Arleigh Burke-class destroyers.
Mm-hmm.
These ships are the shield of the fleet. I mean, their entire design philosophy is built around tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously and neutralizing them before they get anywhere near the carrier.
But what catches my eye isn't just the ships, it's the air component. There are these reports of F-35 jets staging in the Azores.
Right. And the Azores, for people who don't know their geography, that's way out in the middle of the Atlantic.
So why is that significant? Why not just fly them to a base in, say, Qatar?
Because the Azores is a key logistical waypoint. It's a bridge. You don't park your most advanced fifth-generation stealth fighters there for an air show. You put them there if you're preparing to bridge the Atlantic for rapid deployment into the Central Command Theater.
It signals something bigger.
It signals that the Pentagon expects to need more airframes than the carriers can currently hold. It's a pipeline. They are setting up a conveyor belt of air power directly to the Middle East.
But here is where the calculation gets so dangerous. Back in June 2025, we had that so-called 12-day war. It was a very limited exchange. Iran absorbed a blow, fired back just enough to save face, and then everyone de-escalated. It was almost like choreographed violence.
Right, the bloody nose strategy. That was the term everyone used. The U.S. hits a radar site. Iran hits an empty field near a U.S. base. Everyone claims victory and goes home.
But the sources we have today, and I'm talking specifically about Seyed Muhammad Marandi from the University of Tehran, and even the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, they're making it crystal clear. That playbook is dead. It's been torn up.
And they're replacing it with what?
Marandi is warning of a finger-on-the-trigger doctrine. The message is that any strike, even a limited tactical one that Washington intends to just send a message, will be interpreted by Tehran not as a warning, but as the opening salvo of an existential war to overthrow their government.
And that is the critical psychological shift. If they believe Trump is actually trying to do a Libya 2011 or an Iraq 2003, they have absolutely no incentive to hold back.
None.
If you think you were going to be hanged anyway, you empty the magazine on your way out. It's as simple as that.
So they are viewing this as a regime change operation, regardless of how Washington tries to frame it.
Yes. And because they view it as existential, their response won't be measured. It won't be proportional. They are threatening an all-out saturation attack on every U.S. asset in the region.
And the economic fallout of that is... it's just terrifying to contemplate. We have quotes from Iranian officials threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz.
The jugular vein of the global economy.
I want to read this specific threat because it chills the blood. Quote, Americans and their backers won't be allowed to profit from a war they started.
Let's just pause on that. The Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about roughly 20, sometimes 30% of the world's entire oil supply passing through that narrow choke point every single day.
It's unbelievably narrow.
If Iran mines that strait or sinks a single supertanker in the main shipping lane, global oil markets don't just spike, they break. We're talking about $200, maybe $300 a barrel overnight.
The global supply chain just freezes.
It makes the inflation of the early 2020s look like a joke. This would be a genuine worldwide economic depression triggered in a matter of hours.
And militarily, this is not going to be a clean fight. I was looking at an analysis from retired Commodore Steve Jeremy of the Royal Navy.
Okay.
He raises a tactical point that I don't think is getting nearly enough airtime in the mainstream press. He calls it the math problem of modern naval warfare.
This is the swarm versus the shield debate. It is the defining question of naval combat in the 2020s.
Exactly. Explain that for us. What does that mean in practical terms?
Okay, so you have these massive, multi-billion-dollar U.S. destroyers. The USS Michael Murphy, for example. It is equipped with the Aegis Combat System and these Mark 41 vertical launch systems, or VLS.
The best technology money can buy.
I mean, it's incredibly advanced. They can supposedly track a golf ball in space. They can shoot down incoming ballistic missiles. On paper, it's a fortress.
Sounds invincible.
It sounds invincible until you look at the inventory.
Yeah.
A destroyer has a finite number of cells in its VLS, let's say 90 to 96 missile cells. Once those missiles are fired, the tube is empty.
And you can't just pop in another one.
No. You cannot reload a Mark 41 VLS at sea. Missiles are too heavy. The crane requirements are too precise. It's a complex, dangerous operation. You have to go all the way back to a major port to reload.
And the Iranian strategy is to exploit that very specific limitation.
Exactly. It's all about volume and asymmetry. We're looking at reports of this thing called the Shahid Bagheri. This is a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying piece of engineering.
What is it?
It's a converted container ship. So to a satellite or to another ship's radar. It just looks like a normal cargo vessel. But the deck has been modified. It is essentially a floating hive for UAVs, dozens, maybe hundreds of suicide drones.
So it's a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse carrier. Then you have the Zulfiqar-class fast attack craft.
Small, fast boats, speedboats with missiles.
Swarms of them. So the strategy is to send a wave of cheap drones, maybe they cost $20,000 each, and these fast boats to force the U.S. destroyers to expend their expensive, limited interceptors.
Right, the math problem.
It is. If a destroyer fires a $2 million SM-6 missile to kill a $20,000 drone, Iran wins that economic exchange every single time. But more importantly, if the destroyer fires all 90 of its missiles in the first 2 days, just fending off the swarm, what happens on day 3 when the real anti-ship ballistic missiles come flying in?
Commodore Jeremy's analysis argues that Iranian swarms could deplete the missile stocks on these U.S. destroyers within a week and a half.
A week and a half. 10 days. That is the potential timeline of U.S. naval supremacy in the Persian Gulf without a major resupply.
And after that, they have to retreat to rearm. But where do they go? Usually it's to Bahrain or the UAE.
And that is the checkmate move Iran is signaling. They have explicitly stated that if this war starts, those ports in Bahrain and the UAE are getting leveled immediately. Day 1, hour 1. They're targeting the logistics.
So the ships can't go home.
If the U.S. ships have to retreat and there's nowhere to dock safely within 1,000 miles, the Armada becomes a liability. It becomes a huge floating target with no ammo.
It brings up that quote from the WLA report about ghost boats. The idea that these small, fast vessels can just disappear into the commercial traffic of the Gulf. There are thousands of ships there every day and then strike from close range. It really highlights that while the U.S. has superior tonnage and technology, Iran has the home field advantage. They've spent decades preparing for exactly this asymmetric scenario.
It's the difference between projecting power and defending territory. Iran is fighting for what they see as their survival. They are fighting on their own doorstep. The U.S. is fighting in a away game with a long, fragile supply line.
And Trump says he wants a deal, but the demands he's making are, as we said, impossible for any sovereign nation to accept without collapsing.
So we are in a game of chicken where one driver has publicly cut their own brake lines. It's an incredibly dangerous moment.
Speaking of deals and impossible situations, let's pivot to the diplomatic track, because it's not all aircraft carriers and missile cells. There is a frantic diplomatic hustle happening right now.
There is.
And the center of gravity for that seems to be, of all places, Turkey.
Yes, the Ankara connection. This is one of those storylines that gets buried under the war headlines, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding the bigger picture. Turkish President Erdogan has proposed a trilateral summit.
Involving who?
The U.S., Turkey, and Iran. A face-to-face meeting to de-escalate.
And despite the tensions, reports from the Hurriyet newspaper, which is a major Turkish outlet, suggest that President Trump responded positively to this idea.
Which is fascinating. I mean, Trump loves the summit. He loves the drama, the photo op. But you have to look at who is actually moving on the ground.
And who is that?
Iranian Foreign Minister Araki is currently in Istanbul meeting with Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister. So this isn't just talk. The channels are open. The machinery of diplomacy is grinding away, even as the warships get closer.
But the big question is why? Why is Turkey stepping up here? I mean, they are a NATO member, sure, but they have a very complicated relationship with both Washington and Tehran. They often play both sides. Is this just Erdogan wanting to be the global peacemaker?
No. This is about self-preservation, pure and simple. Just look at the map. Turkey shares a massive, rugged, difficult-to-control border with Iran. If the U.S. strategy succeeds, if they actually bomb the Iranian central government into collapse, what happens next?
Absolute chaos.
You get a power vacuum. You get millions of refugees flooding across the border into Turkey, which is already dealing with millions of Syrian refugees and does not want more. But more importantly, in that vacuum, you would likely see the rise of independent Kurdish factions inside Iran.
So it's the Kurdish issue again. It always comes back to that.
Always. It always comes back to the Kurds in this region. Turkey fears an independent Kurdish state, or even a semi-autonomous Kurdish region, gaining significant power in a fractured Iran, more than they fear a nuclear Iran. That is not an exaggeration.
Why is it such an existential threat for them?
Because if the Kurdish groups in Iran gain power, they might link up with the Kurdish groups in Turkey and Syria, reigniting the PKK insurgency. Erdogan's nightmare scenario is a greater Kurdistan, emerging from the ashes of a collapsed Iran right on his southern flank.
So they need Iran to stay intact.
Exactly. They need Iran to be weak enough not to threaten Turkey, but strong enough to keep its own borders intact and, frankly, to suppress Kurdish separatism. They're trying to thread a very, very thin needle here.
Prevent the U.S. from shattering Iran while keeping their NATO credentials and their relationship with Trump solid.
It's an incredible geopolitical balancing act.
There was a very strange, very specific anecdote that Trump threw out there recently regarding his leverage over Iran. He claimed, and this is just wild, that he personally stopped the execution of 837 people in Iran.
I saw that clip. The number was so bizarrely specific. Not 800, not 850, 837.
He said he called them, presumably the Iranian leadership, and threatened that if these people were hanged, Iran would be, quote, hit harder than you've ever been hit. And he claims they stopped the executions an hour before they were scheduled.
Okay, so we have to analyze the veracity versus the optics. Is there any independent verification that 837 imminent executions were halted on his call?
No, none whatsoever.
Right. The number itself feels suspicious. However, the claim itself serves a very clear purpose.
It's a flex. It's a power move.
It's more than that. It allows him to sell the narrative of peace through strength to his domestic audience. He can say, look, I'm saving lives, I'm a humanitarian, but I'm doing it by being the scariest guy in the room. It positions him as this sort of benevolent strongman.
So whether it actually happened is almost secondary to the diplomatic signaling.
I think so. He is telling Iran, I am watching everything you do, nothing is secret, I'm even involved in your internal judicial matters. It's a psychological tool as much as anything else.
It's high-stakes poker. But while Trump is playing poker in the Gulf, it looks like he's playing 3D chess, or maybe just confusing everyone in Ukraine. This story about the ghost truce is absolutely baffling.
Baffling is the right word. If the Gulf is all about heat and explosions, Eastern Europe right now is about cold. Extreme, deadly cold. And we have to look at the timeline because it just doesn't add up.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So President Trump announces somewhat out of the blue that he personally asked Vladimir Putin for a one-week truce on energy strikes. The justification was the weather in Kyiv temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius.
Which is lethal, let's be very clear. Minus 30 without heating isn't just uncomfortable, it is deadly. Pipes burst, elderly people die in their apartments, the city's entire infrastructure just crumbles. So Trump framed this as a humanitarian gesture.
And he said Putin agreed. He was very complimentary. He said it was a sign of respect.
He did, but then the Kremlin comes out, specifically Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, and the story changes. Just a little, but in a very important way. Peskov confirms there was an exchange of letters. Not a phone call, mind you. Letters. That implies a certain distance, a formality. And he says, yes, Moscow agreed to a pause, but that ends on February 1st.
February 1st. Wait, that is this coming Sunday. So by the time people are hearing this, the truce is almost over.
Exactly. And the discrepancy is huge. Trump sells it as a fresh victory, a sign of his unique influence over Putin. The Kremlin basically says, yeah, we've been doing this for a few days and it's about to end.
But the most damaging part of this whole story isn't the timeline. It's who was left out of the loop.
Zelensky.
President Zelensky appeared to be completely unaware of this arrangement until after it was supposedly active. He issued this very belated statement thanking Trump, but it read like someone trying to catch up to a train that had already left the station.
It's embarrassing for him.
It's worse than embarrassing.
Oh.
It reinforces the narrative that the biggest decisions about Ukraine's survival are being made in Washington and Moscow over Kyiv's head. It treats Ukraine as a subject, not a partner.
And here is the reality on the ground, which makes this even more confusing. Despite the supposed truce, the Ukrainian Air Force reported that 111 Russian drones and a ballistic missile were launched at Kyiv just last night.
So what kind of truce is this?
Well, that's the loophole. The agreement, as the Russians tell it, was specifically about energy infrastructure. So Russia can launch 111 drones at military targets, command centers, logistics hubs, or even residential areas that aren't directly connected to a power plant, and technically, they are abiding by the letter of the truce.
That is deeply, deeply cynical.
It is. And some analysts, like Alexander Mershouris, suggest the Russians are using this energy pause for a purely tactical reason. They aren't just being nice.
They're rearming.
They are using this week to stockpile their high-end missiles, the Iskanders, the Kinzhals, for a massive, overwhelming strike the moment the deadline passes on February 1st. They are letting the civilians freeze just enough to be miserable, softening up the air defenses with cheap drones while saving the real hammer blow for Sunday.
So this humanitarian gesture is actually a military tactic.
It appears that way. And at the same time, we have this shadowy meeting happening in Abu Dhabi. We have reports of Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's envoy, and Jared Kushner meeting with Russian representatives.
The Abu Dhabi secret talks. This is where the real architecture of the post-war world is being drafted, far away from the cameras.
The rumors are circulating that security guarantees between the U.S. and Ukraine are 90% agreed upon.
That sounds like progress, doesn't it?
It sounds like progress until you realize the other side of the table is effectively empty. Russia hasn't seen these guarantees.
So the U.S. is negotiating a deal with Ukraine about Russia. Without Russia in the room.
Exactly. And Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was reportedly furious about this.
I can imagine.
He is demanding a return to the Istanbul Principles. This goes all the way back to the failed talks of 2022. He's talking about neutral status for Ukraine, no NATO, demilitarization. Lavrov is essentially saying, you can sign whatever you want with Zelensky in Abu Dhabi, but if it doesn't meet our core red lines, the paper it's written on is worthless and the war continues.
So the U.S. is trying to cut a deal to get itself out of the conflict, but they are negotiating with themselves and the Ukrainians while completely ignoring the guy with the army occupying 20% of the country. It makes no sense.
And speaking of Zelensky, his domestic situation sounds like it is completely collapsing. We have a report from Jackson Hinkle, who is looking at a Ukrainian journalist doing Vox Pop street interviews in Kyiv.
Okay.
The timing was Zelensky's birthday, January 25th.
And the responses were not good, I think.
Brutal. You expect some fatigue in wartime, but this was visceral, raw hatred.
What did they say?
One resident, when asked what gift to give the president for his birthday, suggested, quote, a private plot at a crematorium, preferably while he's still alive.
Wow. That's dark. That's beyond just political disagreement.
It reflects the absolute despair, and the hard data supports this feeling. 60% of Kyiv is without heating right now. 80% of Kharkov is without heating.
And it's minus 30 degrees.
Exactly. When you are freezing to death, your patience for geopolitical maneuvering just evaporates. You don't care about security guarantees, you care about survival.
And there's the corruption angle on top of all of it. People aren't just cold, they feel robbed.
Yes, there's specific anger directed at a figure named Mindich, who is reportedly associated with Zelensky. The allegation, or at least the rumor on the street, is that he fled to Israel with funds that were meant for infrastructure repair.
And whether that's true or not, the perception is lethal for a leader.
You mentioned earlier that Zelensky is the face of resistance. He was. But now, with the corruption allegations swirling and the physical reality of the freeze, for many Ukrainians, he's becoming the face of their suffering.
The whole debate is shifting from how do we win to how do we survive? And when you have your biggest ally making deals over your head and your own inner circle is being accused of theft, your political capital is effectively zero.
It feels like the whole world is shifting under our feet. We have the Middle East on the verge of exploding, Eastern Europe freezing, and the U.S. trying to juggle it all.
Which brings us to the broader picture. We looked at an interview with Kishore Mahbubani, the Singaporean diplomat. He has this really interesting thesis.
Right, about rupture and resilience.
Exactly. He argues that 2025 was the year of rupture. That was when the U.S. raised tariffs on over 100 countries. And the expectation in Washington was that the global trading system would either collapse or everyone would come begging for exemptions.
And that didn't happen.
Not at all. He says 192 other countries had ignored the U.S. and kept trading with each other. They showed resilience. They realized they didn't need Washington's permission to do business.
And they didn't just ignore it. They actively built new bridges. He cites the EU-India trade deal, calling it the mother of all deals.
And the EU-Mercosur deal. That's Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. You're talking about a trading bloc of 700 million people that completely bypasses American protectionism.
So it's the law of unintended consequences.
Completely. You weaponize the dollar and you weaponize tariffs to protect your own economy. But what you end up doing is accelerating the creation of a parallel global economy that doesn't need you. You push people out of the room so they go and build their own house.
The statistics he uses are just staggering. Mahbubani notes that in the year 2000, the economy of the European Union was 8 times larger than China's.
8 times.
Today, they are roughly equal. By 2050, the projection is that the EU's economy will be half the size of China's.
That is the shift. That's the tectonic plate moving under our feet. The resilience he talks about is the global south and the non-Western powers realizing they can function without Washington's blessing.
So while the U.S. is sending armadas to the Gulf and trying to manage a proxy war in Ukraine,
the rest of the world is just quietly signing trade deals. They are building infrastructure while we are building aircraft carriers.
that is a very sobering thought. We are busy with battleships, and they are busy with container ships. And history usually favors the container ships in the long run.
Usually does.
I want to move to our final segment, and this one is deeply disturbing. It connects the foreign policy we've been discussing with domestic civil liberties in a way that is hard to ignore.
Right.
We have leaks from Dropsite News regarding the plans for post-war Gaza. They are calling it the Emirati Compound or the Gaza First Planned Community in Rafah.
This is the panopticon concept made real. For those who don't know, the panopticon was an 18th century prison designed by Jeremy Bentham, where a single guard could watch all the inmates without them knowing if they were being watched at any given moment.
Constant surveillance.
Or the feeling of constant surveillance, which achieves the same social control. This plan for Gaza details a biometric surveillance zone designed to house 25,000 Palestinians. It is not just housing, it is a control grid.
And all entry and exit are controlled by a so-called International Stabilization Force. But who's leading it?
A U.S. officer, Major General Jasper Jeffers.
So the U.S. puts an American face on the occupation. It makes the U.S. directly responsible for managing the cage.
And it goes beyond just physical security. This is about thought control. The leaks mention specific curriculum changes in the schools there, removing Hamas-based texts, whatever that means, and promoting a culture of peace.
Which critics like Ali Abunimah argue is just code for forced normalization with Israel and the erasure of Palestinian identity.
One of the analysts we looked at compared this to the residential schools for indigenous people in Canada or the U.S., or even a type of concentration camp designed to erase cultural identity. It is the industrialization of occupation.
You take a devastated, traumatized population, put them in a high-tech enclosure, and then attempt to re-engineer their entire society from the ground up using biometrics and policing.
It's social engineering at gunpoint.
And the scary part is, these tools and these mindsets, they don't stay abroad. We are seeing a direct spillover into the U.S. We have reports from the Majority Report and transcripts involving Katie Fang about the recent arrest of journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort.
This is where the boomerang hits home. These journalists were arrested for what? For covering a protest at a church that involved an ICE director? Think about that for a second. Journalists arrested for doing their job on American soil.
And look at the rhetoric that's becoming normalized. You have a DHS official, a man named Gregory Bovino, publicly threatening consequences for any citizen who calls ICE agents Gestapo.
Consequences for speech. It's a direct threat from a government official against the First Amendment.
And it gets even more specific and more chilling. There was a tabletop exercise held at the University of Pennsylvania, which was discussed by the attorney Mark Zaid.
Right, they game out these crisis scenarios.
They simulated a scenario where the president decides to federalize the National Guard to crush domestic protests.
And the result of that simulation was terrifying. The participants, these were lawyers, military officials, national security experts, they found that in this scenario, the rule of law completely crumbled.
How so?
The courts couldn't move fast enough to issue injunctions to stop the military, the legal guardrails that we all assume protect us from tyranny. They turned out to be made of paper when faced with the physical power of the state.
So let's connect these two threads. We have a biometric panopticon being designed for Gaza, led by a U.S. general, and simultaneously, back home, U.S. journalists are being arrested for their work, and government officials are threatening citizens for using the wrong words.
It feels like the tools of control are migrating.
They always do. There's a concept called the boomerang effect of colonization. What you do to the other abroad, the surveillance, the control, the militarized policing, it eventually comes home to be used against your own citizens.
The militarization of the police, the surveillance tech we see in every city, the suppression of dissent, it is all part of the same continuum. You build the machine to control Rafah, and eventually that same machine gets turned on New York or Chicago.
So let's zoom out and try to summarize this massive and frankly quite heavy picture we've painted today.
It is a picture of incredible overstretch, but also of transformation. It's not just one thing.
No. We have the Armada sitting off the coast of Iran, facing a swarm threat that could potentially deplete its defenses in 10 days. We have a ghost truce in Ukraine that ends this Sunday, with Russia seemingly preparing for a massive escalation while a continent freezes.
And while all that is happening, we have the global south, as Mahbubani calls it, quietly building a new economic architecture that doesn't rely on the dollar, while the U.S. is trying to fight on 3 different fronts.
3 fronts: Iran, Ukraine, and a domestic one.
Exactly. And underneath it all, we have a domestic situation where the very boundaries of civil liberty are being tested by the machinery that was originally built for foreign intervention.
It is a lot to process. But if there is one single thing the listener should be watching this weekend, what is it?
Sunday, February 1st. That is the moment the energy truce in Ukraine officially expires. That is the moment we see if the Armada in the Gulf stays put or if it strikes. Next week could very well define the next decade.
And here's a final thought I want to leave you with, something to think about. If the global south is truly as resilient as Kishore Mahbubani says it is, can the U.S. actually afford these conflicts anymore? Or are we just witnessing the classic overextension of an empire in real time?
That is the question of the century. And I don't think we're going to like the answer when it comes.
We will be watching. If you found this analysis valuable, if it helped you connect the dots between the Gulf, Kiev, and maybe even your own backyard, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. It really helps more people find this deep dive.
Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more. Until we meet again.